My name is Clara Whitfield, and I am 38 years old, and this is the story of how I walked away from an empty kitchen on Christmas Eve and changed my life forever. I had spent 15 years being the invisible daughter, the one who cooked and cleaned and arranged and prepared, while everyone else sat at the table and enjoyed what I had made. I had built a company worth millions of dollars while my family called my work a little hobby and introduced my sister as the one with a future. And then one December, I finally chose myself, and the consequences were more dramatic than anything I could have scripted on my own. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story did not start in a boardroom or a Miami hotel room. It started in a kitchen in Phoenix, Arizona on a cold December evening when I was 22 years old with a newly printed degree in business communications, a stack of rejection emails, and no idea that I was about to begin a pattern that would define the next 15 years of my life. The year was 2009 and the economy had fallen apart. I had graduated that spring full of optimism and walked directly into a job market that had no interest in optimistic new graduates with no experience. I was living back in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the same faded yellow walls and old trophies from high school, and every morning I woke up and sent out more resumes into the digital void. The house smelled like cinnamon that December. My mother, Pamela, had spent 2 weeks decorating every corner with ribbons and pine branches and ceramic snowmen she had collected over the years. There was something warm about it, but also something suffocating, because beneath all that holiday beauty was a very clear set of unspoken rules about who mattered in this house and who was expected to serve. 18 guests were coming for the Christmas gathering that year. Relatives and a few of my father's business contacts from his landscaping supply company. My mother walked into the living room where I was sitting on the floor with my laptop open, surrounded by cover letters and company research, and she announced without looking at me that I would be handling the entire dinner. Not a question. Not a discussion. A statement delivered the way someone reads a grocery list. My younger sister Brianna was 17 at the time, and she was curled up on the couch watching videos on her phone. She was not asked to do anything. When I pointed out that I had job applications to finish, my mother gave me that look, the one that meant the conversation was already over in her mind, and said that family came first and that Brianna needed to rest because she was starting college applications. Brianna was watching videos of cats falling off furniture, but apparently that counted as resting, and my job search did not count as anything important. I spent the next 2 days in that kitchen. I made a honey-glazed ham and a turkey breast and homemade cranberry relish and a green bean casserole and sweet potato souffle and 2 kinds of pie. I washed the good china and polished the silver candlesticks and arranged the centerpiece with fresh flowers. When the guests arrived on Christmas Eve, I was still in the kitchen wearing an apron with a gravy stain on the front. My father, Robert, stood in the living room with his glass of bourbon, introducing Brianna to his business partner, Gerald Mercer. He said to Gerald that Brianna was his youngest, and that she was going to college to study finance, and that she had her whole future ahead of her. Gerald shook her hand warmly and said something about the apple not falling far from the tree. I walked through the room carrying a tray of stuffed dates wrapped in bacon, and my father glanced at me for exactly half a second and then turned back to Gerald without a word. Later that evening, a woman named Dorothy Mercer picked up one of the stuffed dates from the tray and said that she did not know who had made these, but that they were absolutely wonderful. My mother waved her hand toward me and said that it was just Clara and that she had plenty of time for cooking since she was still looking for work. Dorothy gave me a kind smile, but I had already turned back toward the kitchen. That small dismissal lodged itself somewhere deep inside me and never fully left. The pattern that started that Christmas repeated itself with extraordinary consistency over the next 15 years. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter, every birthday celebration, every anniversary dinner. I was the one in the kitchen. I was the one setting up and breaking down and washing the dishes at the end of the night. Brianna was the one at the table, being charming, being praised, being introduced as the one with potential. By 2013, I had started my own company. I called it Pinnacle Event Group, and I built it out of everything I had learned from years of organizing family gatherings, managing impossible expectations, and creating beautiful experiences out of nothing. I had natural instincts for logistics and vendor relationships, and the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made clients feel like they were in completely capable hands. When I mentioned it to my mother, she barely looked up from the magazine she was reading and asked if that meant I was going to be planning children's birthday parties. I told her it was corporate events, product launches, galas, and award ceremonies. She said that was nice and asked if I could stop at the pharmacy on my way home. She never asked about it again. Neither did my father. Neither did Brianna. So I stopped bringing it up. I built Pinnacle Event Group in near total silence as far as my family was concerned. My first major corporate client came in 2014 and paid me $12,000 for a product launch event in Scottsdale. By 2017, I had 8 employees and a proper office in the Arts District of downtown Phoenix. By 2021, I was coordinating events for national corporations and regional government agencies. By the end of 2024, I had 26 employees, and the company had generated $4.4 million in revenue that year. But every time I visited my parents' house, I drove my older car instead of the new one sitting in my building garage. I wore ordinary clothes. I answered questions about work with vague, short answers because no one ever asked follow-up questions anyway. I had tried once in 2017 to tell my father about a significant contract I had landed with a major hotel brand. He had listened for about 40 seconds and then said that was great and turned to ask Brianna about her promotion at the marketing firm she worked at, which was a division of his own company, a position she had been given, not earned. That was the last time I volunteered information about my professional life to my family. Brianna had become the centerpiece of every family gathering. She sat at the table telling stories about her stressful job, her demanding clients, her impressive meetings, while I served the food she was eating. My parents nodded along with proud expressions. My father would mention that revenue at his company was up or that Brianna had brought in a new client, and everyone at the table would offer congratulations. I would carry another dish from the kitchen and think about the 37 people currently employed across my company and say nothing. Thanksgiving 2024 was when something shifted inside me permanently. I had just closed a contract with a regional resort chain worth $720,000. It was the largest single contract Pinnacle had ever signed. I was exhausted in the way that comes after months of intense negotiation, and I was also proud in a way I rarely let myself feel. Then I drove to my parents' house, and my mother met me at the door with an apron already in her hand. She had written out a schedule for the turkey basting. An actual printed schedule with times and notes. I stood in the kitchen holding that piece of paper while 26 people reported to me professionally, and I had just signed a contract that exceeded the annual profits of my father's entire business. And I put on the apron. I basted the turkey. I made everything from scratch. I served 18 people while Brianna sat at the table telling everyone about her stressful quarter and the long hours she had been putting in at Dad's company. My father said he was proud of Brianna. He said revenue was up 14% and that she deserved the credit. I could have mentioned that my own revenue was up 38% that year. I did not. After dinner, while I was up to my elbows in soapy water scrubbing pans, I made a decision. I did not know yet exactly what form it would take. But I knew that this was going to be the last time I stood in their kitchen and served a meal while being treated like someone whose entire purpose was to cook and clean and disappear. I dried my hands, hung the apron on the hook by the stove, and drove home to my apartment, the one in the Arcadia neighborhood of Phoenix, with the high ceilings and the rooftop terrace that my family had never once visited because they had never once asked to see it. 17 days later, on December 19, 2024, my phone buzzed with an email that would change everything. I was sitting in my office at Pinnacle Event Group, watching the afternoon light stretch long shadows across the courtyard outside my window. My operations director and closest professional ally, Daniel Rourke, knocked on my office door. Daniel was 53 years old with close-cropped gray hair and a manner so steady and calm that it made every crisis feel manageable. He had joined Pinnacle in 2016 when we were still a small operation and had grown with the company through every phase of expansion. He held his tablet out toward me and said I needed to look at this. The email was from a woman named Serena Voss, who served as the Chief Executive Officer of Landmark Collective, a privately held hospitality and real estate development group with an estimated valuation of $4.2 billion. The subject line read Exclusive Partnership Inquiry Year-Round Event Services. I read it 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. Landmark Collective wanted to sign an exclusive annual contract with Pinnacle Event Group to manage all of their corporate functions, investor dinners, product activations, and high-end gala events across their entire portfolio. They had reviewed our work, reviewed our references, and completed a formal due diligence process. The proposed contract value was $2.3 million. This was not a proposal. This was an offer. I looked at Daniel and asked if this was real. He said he had already called their legal team to confirm and that it was absolutely real. Then he said there was one condition. Serena Voss wanted to meet me in person before signing anything. She had a policy of never finalizing major agreements with someone she had not met face to face. The meeting was scheduled for December 24th at 10 in the morning at Landmark Collective headquarters in Tampa, Florida. December 24th was Christmas Eve. I asked if we could reschedule. Daniel shook his head. Serena was leaving for Portugal on December 26th and would not be available again until the 3rd week of January. If we did not have a signed agreement by Christmas Eve, the contract would go to our primary competitor, a company called Apex Occasions that had been aggressively pursuing Landmark Collective for over a year. I understood exactly what was at stake. A contract with Landmark Collective was not just about the $2.3 million. It was about what a client of that profile represented to the broader industry. Their endorsement would mean introductions to their network of partners and investors. It would mean a credible foothold in the Florida market where we had no presence. It meant Pinnacle Event Group becoming a nationally recognized name instead of a strong regional player. And if Apex Occasions got this contract instead, the industry would notice. Clients would wonder what Landmark had seen in them that they had not seen in us. The momentum we had spent years building could begin to erode. Daniel said there was one more thing. He pulled up another section of the email. Serena Voss had written a note at the bottom saying that she had read my profile in a business publication called Elevation Magazine, which had featured me in their annual list of top 40 entrepreneurs under 45 in the events and hospitality sector. She had written that my approach to creating meaningful client experiences aligned with Landmark Collective's values, and that she was eager to meet the person behind Pinnacle Event Group. The Elevation magazine feature had been published in September. I had been interviewed for 3 hours, photographed in my office, and quoted extensively about sustainable event design and the future of corporate gathering culture. The article described me as a quietly powerful force building one of the most client-centered event companies in the American Southwest. I had never shown it to my family. I had considered it for about 4 minutes and then imagined the responses I would receive and put the magazine in my desk drawer instead. But Serena Voss had read it. Serena Voss was impressed. I told Daniel to book my flight. He was already typing. He told me I would leave on December 23rd at 9 in the evening, arriving in Tampa at 1:15 in the morning with a reservation at a waterfront hotel, and the meeting confirmed at 10 sharp. I sat back in my chair and felt the particular mix of focused calm and deep excitement that comes before every significant moment in a career. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from my mother. It said, "Call me. Important." I stared at those 2 words and something in my chest went tight. 15 years of experience told me that important from my mother meant one of exactly 2 things. Either someone in the family had a health crisis or she wanted something from me. No one had mentioned any illness. I picked up the phone and called her back. She answered immediately. She told me that Christmas plans had changed. Brianna was bringing 4 of her colleagues to the dinner this year, and with other family and friends the total was now 27 people. 27 people was a number I could have managed professionally with my eyes closed. It was a number that filled me with cold dread personally. My mother told me she needed me at the house early the next morning to start cooking, and that she had already written out menus and shopping lists, and that Brianna was too busy with work to help. I could see through my office window Daniel at his desk, watching me with the quiet concern of someone who had witnessed versions of this conversation before. I told my mother I could not come. I told her I had a business trip. She laughed. She actually laughed. She asked what kind of business trip happened on Christmas Eve and told me that whatever little event I was putting together could wait. I told her this was a significant client meeting. She said please and told me we both knew my freelance work was flexible and that this was family. There was that word again. Family. The word she used as a door to shut every conversation that might require her to take my life seriously. I told her I could not cancel this trip. She asked whether I meant could not or would not. I said both. There was silence. Then she told me I was being selfish. She said that Brianna gave everything to this family and that I could not manage to show up and make one meal. She told me that Brianna had important colleagues coming and that these were people who mattered to her future and to my father's business connections, and that my absence would embarrass everyone. I closed my eyes. I had heard some version of this speech more times than I could count. Being told I was selfish for having a professional obligation. Being told I was letting the family down by existing outside the small role they had assigned me. Being told that Brianna mattered and that her connections mattered and that her future mattered while mine was a punchline or a subject change. I told my mother my answer was no. She asked me to repeat myself. I told her I would not be there the next day. I would not cook dinner for 27 people. I had a meeting that could not be rescheduled and I was going to Tampa. She asked what meeting could possibly be more important than her family Christmas. I told her a contract worth over $2 million. The line went silent for a moment. Just a moment. I thought perhaps she had finally heard me. Perhaps this was the moment when she would understand. Then she laughed again. The same dismissive sound I had heard all my life. She told me $2 million was a fantasy. She told me I organized little corporate get-togethers and that I needed to stop pretending to be something I was not. She told me I was 38 years old, without a husband, without a real career, and that I had wasted the best years of my life on a hobby while my sister built a genuine future. Each sentence landed with the precision of something she had been holding ready for years. Calculated. Designed to reduce me to something manageable. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see Daniel had stood up from his desk. He was watching me with an expression I recognized as concern. Something inside me did not break. It clarified. Like a liquid that had been cloudy for years, suddenly going completely still and transparent. I told my mother calmly that I was going to Tampa. I told her that she would need to figure out the dinner without me. She told me that if I walked away from this family, I should not expect to be welcomed back. I told her goodbye and ended the call. I sat for a long moment holding the phone in my hand, watching the winter light change outside my window. My heartbeat was steady. My mind was clear. Daniel appeared in my doorway, and I told him what had happened. He sat down across from my desk and leaned forward and told me something I had needed to hear for years. He said he had known me for almost 9 years. He had watched me negotiate contracts that made senior executives nervous. He had watched me manage crises that would have destroyed other companies. He told me I was one of the most capable leaders he had ever worked alongside. And then he said that when it came to my family, I became someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who forgot everything she had built. He said this was the moment. He said I could keep making myself smaller to fit into their expectations, or I could choose my own path, but that I could not keep doing both. My phone buzzed. A text from Brianna that said Mom is crying and that I was so selfish and that I could not even cook one meal for the family. I typed back that I had work commitments. Her response came within seconds. She said I planned birthday parties and needed to get over myself. I deleted the message thread. I told Daniel to confirm the flight. He nodded and said I was making the right call. That mattered more than he probably knew. That evening I went home to my apartment. My real home. The one with the exposed timber beams and the rooftop garden and the view of Camelback Mountain glowing copper in the evening light. The apartment my family had never seen because they had never asked. I packed a carry-on bag with my best charcoal gray suit and a white silk blouse and my laptop and the Landmark collective contract files and my presentation materials. And then I packed one more thing. The September issue of Elevation magazine with my photograph on page 43. I was not certain why I packed it. Perhaps as evidence. Perhaps as a kind of armor. Perhaps simply as a reminder that I was not the person my family had decided I was. That somewhere out there in the professional world, I was seen clearly and accurately and with respect. At 9 p.m. on December 23rd, my plane lifted off from Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport and climbed through the clear desert night toward Florida. Below me, my family was presumably gathered in the living room, furious at my absence. I let them be furious. I had a contract to sign. The flight was 4 hours, and I spent most of it reviewing contract documents, making margin notes, preparing for every question Serena Voss might raise. But somewhere over Texas around midnight, I set down my work and opened the Elevation magazine to page 43. There was the photograph. Me standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Phoenix office, arms relaxed at my sides, looking directly at the camera with an expression that I barely recognized as my own because I so rarely allowed myself to look that settled and assured. The caption read, "Clara Whitfield, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Event Group." The opening paragraph of the article said that in an industry crowded with loud personalities and theatrical presentations, Clara Whitfield had built a $4 million enterprise on a foundation of rigorous preparation and an almost intuitive understanding of what clients needed before they knew to ask for it. It quoted her saying that she believed in invisible excellence, meaning that the best event was one where everything felt effortless and natural, even though behind that surface was an enormous amount of careful invisible work. 3 other executives in the article described me as indispensable and exceptional, and as someone who had quietly redefined what regional event management could look like. My family had no idea this article existed. I had imagined showing it to them for about 6 minutes before picturing my mother's response. She would probably have said something about the lighting in the photograph not being flattering, or that Brianna's colleague had also been featured in a publication once, and it was not really a big deal. So I had put it in my desk drawer and never mentioned it. I put the magazine back in my bag as the plane began its descent into Tampa. The lights of the city spread below me in the warm December night like scattered embers, and I felt the clean electric anticipation that always preceded something significant. A notification arrived as we taxied to the gate. An email from Serena Voss sent at 11:53 at night confirming our 10 o'clock meeting and noting that their legal team would have the final contract ready for signatures and that 2 forms of identification would be needed for notarization. She wrote at the bottom that she was looking forward to meeting the person behind Pinnacle Event Group. I saved the email and then took a screenshot of it and saved that too. Habits of someone who had learned that in the absence of trust, documentation becomes essential. The Waterfront Hotel was everything a Florida December hotel should be. Warm air moving through open corridors, white marble and dark wood, and the sound of water somewhere nearby. I checked in at close to 2 in the morning and was asleep before I could think about anything for too long. When I woke on December 24th, I had 14 unread messages. Several from my mother, several from Brianna, 2 from my father, 2 from numbers I did not recognize, which were probably relatives who had been recruited to apply pressure. I did not read any of them. I showered, dressed in the charcoal suit, applied the kind of quiet professional makeup that says I am serious and I know exactly what I am doing, and sat at the small desk by the window to review my notes one final time. The Tampa waterfront sparkled through the glass. There were already people out walking and jogging along the bay in the warm morning. It looked like a completely different world from the one I had left behind in Phoenix. At 9:30, I took a rideshare to Landmark Collective headquarters. The building was a glass and steel tower in the Harbor Island neighborhood that reflected the sky so perfectly it almost disappeared into it. The lobby was all polished stone and living walls and the kind of proportioned silence that comes from extremely expensive architectural intention. The receptionist verified my identification and handed me a visitor badge and told me that Miss Voss was expecting me and that the elevator to the 38th floor would be on the left. The elevator ride felt both very long and very fast. My reflection watched me from the mirrored doors. I stood straight. I had earned this meeting. Every early morning and late night and difficult client and impossible timeline over 12 years had been building toward this kind of room and this kind of contract. My phone buzzed. A call from Brianna. I declined it. A voicemail notification appeared. Against everything I knew about my own well-being, I listened to it. Brianna's voice said that Mom was having a crisis and that none of the catering services would take a booking on Christmas Eve and that Dad was calling in favors and nobody could help and that Serena Voss was supposed to be coming to their dinner that evening and they had nothing ready and that this was my fault and if I had just done what was asked, none of this would be happening. I stopped the voicemail and replayed one sentence. Serena Voss was supposed to be coming to their dinner that evening. I stood in the elevator watching the floor numbers rise and tried to process what I had just heard. The CEO of Landmark Collective, the woman I was about to meet, was going to my parents' house for Christmas dinner. The dinner I was supposed to have cooked. The dinner that now apparently had no food in it. The elevator opened onto a wide corridor with framed photographs of Landmark Collective properties along both walls. A woman in a navy blazer greeted me with a professional smile and led me toward a corner conference room at the end of the hall. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, and Tampa Bay itself glittered in the morning light like hammered silver. A long table with legal documents arranged in careful stacks dominated the space. At the head of the table stood Serena Voss. She was in her middle 50s with silver-streaked haircut close to her jaw and the kind of precise, attentive eyes that missed nothing. She wore a cream-colored jacket and small diamond earrings, and her handshake was direct and firm. She said it was a genuine pleasure to finally meet me and that she had been looking forward to this conversation for some time. We sat down and got to work. Serena Voss was thorough and intelligent, and she asked exactly the kinds of questions a CEO should ask before signing a contract of this size. She asked about our vendor network, our staffing capacity, our contingency protocols, our client retention data. I answered each one clearly and specifically, drawing on 12 years of accumulated knowledge and experience. At 11:48, we both signed the contract. A photographer who had been stationed quietly in the corner captured the moment. Serena and I shaking hands across the corner of the table with the Tampa waterfront behind us. Her assistant notarized the documents and presented me with my copy in a leather portfolio embossed with the Landmark Collective logo. Serena said welcome to the Landmark family and that she was confident this was going to be an exceptional working relationship. I agreed and meant it. As she gathered her things, she mentioned almost in passing that she was flying to Phoenix that afternoon to spend Christmas Eve with some business contacts there. She said the family was called the Whitmore family and that the husband ran a landscaping supply business and that his wife had extended a very warm invitation and that she had been told the food at their holiday dinners was quite spectacular. She said she did not usually accept these kinds of social invitations, but that the husband was a potential investor in a development project and she was curious about their operation. My throat tightened so slightly that no one would have noticed. The Whitmore family. That was not my family name. But the description matched exactly. Phoenix. Landscaping supply business. Christmas dinner. Spectacular food. The food that was supposed to be spectacular because I was supposed to have made it. I kept my expression neutral and professional and said I hoped she enjoyed herself. She paused at the door and looked at me with those precise eyes and said there was something slightly familiar about my name. She asked if I had any connection to Phoenix. I told her it was a large city. She nodded and moved on. I sat alone in the conference room for several minutes after she left. The signed contract was in my hands. The biggest professional achievement of my career so far. And somewhere in Phoenix, my mother was standing in an empty kitchen with 27 guests arriving in a matter of hours and a CEO from Tampa about to ring her doorbell. A part of me that I will not pretend did not exist wanted to see it. Wanted to know exactly how that dinner was going to unfold. But a larger and more tired part of me simply felt done. I had what I had come for. The contract was real. My company was secured. Whatever happened in Phoenix that evening was no longer my responsibility and had not been my responsibility for a very long time. I had simply taken too long to understand that. I flew back to Phoenix that afternoon, landing at 7:12 in the evening, exactly when the Whitmore family dinner was supposed to be reaching its peak. I took a car from the airport to my apartment, ordered vegetable curry from the Thai place 2 blocks away, and turned my phone completely off. I sat on my rooftop terrace in the warm December evening and ate dinner alone under the Arizona stars, and felt something I had not felt at a family holiday in 15 years. Peace. I did not know the details of what happened at my parents' house that evening. I pieced it together later from 3 separate accounts given to me by people who were there. The clearest and most complete account came from Dorothy Mercer, the same woman who had complimented my cooking at that very first Christmas 15 years earlier. At 5:45 in the evening, my mother Pamela walked into her kitchen expecting to find the usual preparations underway. Trays of appetizers cooling on the counter. The main dishes in various stages of readiness on the stove. The timer counting down. Instead, she found nothing. Cold appliances. Empty counters. No Clara. She called for my father. He came downstairs adjusting his collar and asked what was wrong. She said there was no food. He said he thought Clara was handling it. She said Clara was not there. Brianna came down the stairs in her red holiday dress and asked why they were shouting, and my mother told her there was no dinner. What followed was an hour of escalating desperation. Phone calls to every catering company in Phoenix went unanswered or were politely declined because it was Christmas Eve. A run to the nearest grocery store found the prepared food section nearly stripped bare by other last-minute shoppers. My father called 3 restaurants, none of which could help. By 6:30, when the first guests began arriving, the Whitmore family dining table offered the following: 2 rotisserie chickens from the supermarket, 2 bags of pre-dressed salad, a cheese and cracker board, still in its store packaging, a box of dinner rolls, still in their plastic sleeve. Dorothy Mercer stood in the living room surveying the scene with an expression she later described to me as trying very hard not to show what she was actually thinking. My mother circulated with wine and brittle cheerfulness, telling people there had been a small catering situation and that things were being sorted. 27 people moved through the house with the awkward energy of guests who sense something has gone wrong but do not yet know what. The house itself was beautifully decorated. My mother had extraordinary taste in aesthetics. But the dining table told a story that no amount of pine boughs and candlelight could reframe. At 7:20, Serena Voss arrived. She came in with the composed authority of someone accustomed to evaluating environments professionally. She complimented the decorations. She shook my father's hand. She exchanged pleasantries with my mother. She greeted Brianna warmly. She glanced toward the dining room where the rotisserie chicken sat in its cardboard container under the chandelier, and her expression remained politely neutral. My father guided the conversation toward business. My mother kept the wine moving. Brianna worked the room with focused charm, doing her best to redirect attention from the obvious. And then Dorothy Mercer, who had been scrolling through her phone, made a sound that stopped nearby conversations cold. She had found a post on a professional networking platform. It had been published that afternoon by Serena Voss herself. The photograph showed Serena shaking hands with someone in a bright office in front of a wall of windows overlooking Tampa Bay. The caption read, "Thrilled to formalize our partnership with the extraordinary team at Pinnacle Event Group and with founder Clara Whitfield, whose work has set a new standard for what event management can be." celebrating a remarkable year of growth and an exciting new chapter ahead. Dorothy looked up from her phone and said to my parents loudly enough for the cluster of guests nearby to hear that this was Clara. She zoomed in on the photograph and said this was absolutely Clara standing there with Serena Voss in what looked like a very significant office building in a very significant city signing what appeared to be a very significant contract. The room shifted. Not all at once. In waves. People leaned in. Phones appeared. The name Serena Voss and the name Pinnacle Event Group began moving through the crowd in whispered increments. My father squinted at the screen and said there must be some misunderstanding. Serena herself stepped forward and looked at the photograph on Dorothy's phone, and her expression changed completely. It moved through recognition and surprise and landed somewhere that I can only describe as an entirely new understanding of the room she was standing in. She said Clara Whitfield. She said it slowly, as if placing each syllable deliberately. She looked at my parents and asked if their daughter was Clara Whitfield, the founder of Pinnacle Event Group. My mother opened her mouth and closed it and opened it again and said yes, Clara was their daughter, but that she did not understand what Pinnacle Event Group was. Serena said that Pinnacle Event Group was one of the most highly regarded event management companies in the American Southwest. She said that she had spent the morning with Clara signing a contract worth more than $2 million. She said she had just read Clara's profile in Elevation magazine and found it genuinely inspiring. $2 million. The phrase moved through the nearest group of guests like a current. My father went a color that Dorothy described as somewhere between gray and lavender. He said $2 million, that was more than his company made in a year. Harold Thompson, who had been my father's business associate for over a decade, said that he had had absolutely no idea about any of this. Dorothy was already reading from the Elevation magazine profile, which she had pulled up on her phone. She read that Pinnacle had 26 employees and had generated over $4 million in revenue in the current year. She read the line about invisible excellence. She read the quote that said the best event is one where the effort disappears and only the experience remains. Other guests gathered around phones, reading aloud, taking turns. Someone said there was a full photograph of Clara in her office. Someone else read that 3 major corporate clients had described her as indispensable. Brianna stood at the edge of the gathering clutching her wine glass, and Dorothy said later that Brianna's expression was something she had never seen on another person's face before. My mother stood in the center of her beautiful decorated living room and whispered more to herself than to anyone else that she could not understand why Clara had never told them. Serena said quietly that perhaps no one had ever asked. The silence that came after that was the kind that has weight. Dorothy described it as feeling like all the oxygen left the room for a moment. Harold Thompson looked at my father and said that he had been sitting across from him at business dinners for over a decade and had never once heard him mention that his daughter ran a $4 million company. He said they could have been working together years ago. Serena looked around the room with the calm, measured assessment of someone who had just assembled a set of facts into a conclusion. She said she had met Clara that morning and that Clara had been one of the most prepared and impressive professionals she had encountered in recent years. She said they had spoken for nearly an hour before signing. She paused. She said Clara had not mentioned being connected to the Whitmore family at all. Another wave moved through the room. Brianna made a sound. My father set down his glass. My mother reached for the arm of the nearest chair. Serena added that she had in fact asked Clara during their meeting whether she had any connection to Phoenix and that Clara had given a non-committal answer and moved the conversation forward. The implications settled over the room slowly and completely. Clara had not claimed them, had not wanted the association, had kept the connection hidden not out of shame for herself, but out of something else entirely, and everyone standing in that living room was now quietly understanding what that something else was. Dorothy said softly that this was why Clara was not there. This was why there was no dinner. She had been in Tampa signing this contract while her family expected her to cook for 27 people. Harold said that. Then he stopped himself. He looked at my father and did not say what he had been about to say, but everyone heard it anyway. Serena turned to my parents with a pleasant professional expression that Dorothy described as the kind of smile that is technically warm but contains a verdict. She asked them to please extend her regards to Clara when they spoke to her. She thanked my parents for the invitation and said it had been genuinely illuminating. She set down her untouched wine glass. She mentioned her flight to Portugal in the morning. She said goodnight. The front door clicked shut behind her. The room erupted in the particular way that rooms do when something that has been held tightly suddenly releases. Guests clustered in groups. Conversations overlapped. Dorothy herself went to my mother and put a hand on her arm and said something gentle and honest about the years she had observed Clara working in the background of every family gathering and how she had assumed the family must be enormously proud of her and how it had never occurred to her until tonight that they might not even know what Clara had accomplished. My father retreated to his home office. Brianna went upstairs. My mother sat in a chair by the window and stared at her beautifully decorated empty table and the two cooling rotisserie chickens and the unopened bag of salad and the cheese and crackers still in their supermarket packaging and the dinner rolls still wrapped in plastic. I learned all of this on December 26th when Dorothy Mercer called me directly. She told me everything in quiet, careful detail. She said she owed me an apology for 15 years of attending family events and never once asking what I actually did for a living. She said that she had always thought I seemed capable, but had simply followed the room's lead in treating my presence as incidental. She said she was sorry and that it was not enough, but she wanted to say it anyway. I told her I appreciated it and that she was not the one who should be carrying that apology, but that I received it gratefully. She told me about what Serena had said, that everyone in the room had heard it, that the community would not easily forget what had been revealed. She said my parents had a great deal to answer for, and that the people who mattered in their social circle were unlikely to let them simply move past it without reflection. A small, precise part of me registered something that I will honestly call satisfaction. The larger part of me just felt tired. 15 years of invisible work and quiet excellence had finally become visible, but not in the way I had ever imagined and not because I had forced the moment. It had simply become impossible to contain any longer. That Christmas night in Tampa, I sat on the hotel balcony with a room service dinner in front of me and the warm Florida winter air moving around me and the Atlantic beyond the bay glittering under a full moon. The contract portfolio was on the table beside me. I had turned my phone back on and watched the notifications come flooding in. My mother had sent 6 messages. The first said to call her immediately. The second said that Serena Voss apparently knew me and that people were talking. The third said that she did not understand and that I needed to explain. The fourth said that she hoped I was happy after humiliating the family in front of everyone. The fifth said nothing beyond her name written in full, which I had never seen her do in a text message, and which communicated something in its strange formality. The sixth said she supposed she deserved this. Brianna sent 4 messages. The first said she could not believe me. The second asked if I had really been in Forbes. The third said that I could have told them. The fourth said nothing except that she was sorry, and then a long pause, and then that she did not know if she meant it, but she was saying it anyway. My father sent 2 messages. The first said we needed to talk, and that this was not how families should operate. The second arrived 3 hours later and said only that he was proud of what he had seen and that he did not have the right to say that, but was saying it anyway. I read each message without responding. The through line was clear. Not one message in the initial wave asked whether I was okay. Not one message in the initial wave acknowledged that I had just signed the biggest contract of my career on one of the hardest days I had navigated in years. The first instinct was to explain how this had affected them. The second instinct was to express some version of pride or acknowledgement. The difference between those 2 instincts told me everything I needed to know about where things stood and how much work remained ahead. I called Daniel. He picked up on the second ring and wished me a Merry Christmas. I laughed and said thank you and told him it had been quite a day. He said he had heard something of what had transpired in Phoenix through professional channels. He said Serena Voss had sent a message to our team after the meeting saying that I had been even more impressive in person than on paper. He told me I had made the right call and that the year ahead was going to be the kind of year that changed everything. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and wrote an email. I wrote it slowly and deliberately, the way I would draft a proposal for a complex client. The way I would communicate an important boundary to a vendor relationship that needed renegotiation. To Robert Whitmore and Pamela Whitmore and Brianna Whitmore. The subject line said, "Going forward." I wrote that I had signed a contract with Landmark Collective that morning valued at $2.3 million. I wrote that this was why I had not been at Christmas dinner and that I was not going to apologize for that choice. I wrote that for 15 years I had cooked and cleaned and prepared and served at every family gathering while my career was dismissed as a hobby and my presence was treated as a convenience rather than a relationship. I wrote that I was not selfish for having a professional life that demanded my attention. I was not ungrateful for having standards for how I expected to be treated. I was not a failure because my success did not match the shape they had decided success should take for me. I wrote that I was open to rebuilding something real with my family, but only if certain things changed. I would no longer be treated as the family caterer at any gathering. I would be acknowledged as an equal member of the family, not an afterthought. My work and my career would be engaged with as a genuine and significant part of my life. I would be asked questions with the expectation that my answers mattered. I wrote that if these conditions were not acceptable, I understood. But I would not return to the previous arrangement under any circumstances. I wrote that I would be in touch when I was ready to have real conversations. I signed it simply with my name. I read it twice, revised one sentence, and sent it. Then I sat back and watched the moon move above the water. No one responded that night. I had not expected them to. New Year's Eve 2024. December 31st. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of my apartment watching fireworks burst over downtown Phoenix. The city was brilliant and loud and celebratory, and I felt something matching it inside my own chest for the first time in years. My phone had become a more manageable thing. I had established new rhythms around it. Responding on my own timeline. Muting what needed muting. Setting boundaries not as dramatic announcements, but as quiet personal policy. The currency of my time and attention was mine to distribute, and I was learning to do that with the same intentionality I brought to everything else. On December 29th, a handwritten letter had arrived at my apartment via overnight delivery. The handwriting was my father's. His actual penmanship in ink on paper in an envelope with a stamp. I had not received a handwritten letter from anyone in years. I sat with the unopened envelope for a long time before opening it. Dear Clara, I have spent 5 days trying to find words for what I should have been saying for 15 years. You built a company. A real company with employees and clients and a national reputation and revenue that exceeds my own, and I did not know because I never asked. I told myself I was a good father. I told myself I paid attention to both my children equally. But the truth is that I saw what I expected to see. I expected Brianna to succeed in ways I could measure because they looked like my definition of success. I expected you to struggle or to remain small, and I looked for evidence of that expectation instead of looking at what was actually in front of me. I was wrong in a way that I do not have adequate words for. He wrote that he did not expect forgiveness and understood he had not earned it. He wrote that he wanted me to know that he saw me now. That he had spent 2 evenings reading everything he could find about Pinnacle Event Group and about the Elevation magazine profile and about the work I had done over 12 years. He wrote that he was proud. He knew that word arrived too late and probably landed hollow. But he wrote it because it was true and because truth felt like the only currency he had left to offer. He wrote that if I was willing, he would like to understand what I had built. Not to take credit for it or claim connection to it, but simply to know his daughter as she actually was. He wrote that whatever I decided, he would respect. He signed it with his full name, the same formality I had seen in my mother's text message, and it meant something similar, something about the removal of assumption, about starting from a place of genuine uncertainty rather than entitlement. I did not respond immediately. I was not ready. A letter was not 15 years. Words written on paper were not actions changed over time. But I read it many times in those final days of December, and each time I felt something slightly different. Anger, and then sadness, and then something that was not quite hope, but was perhaps the precondition for it. On New Year's Eve at 11:47 at night, with fireworks building toward their crescendo outside my window, I called my father. He answered immediately. I told him I had received his letter. He said he was glad I had called and that he had not expected it. I told him I had not expected it either. I told him I was willing to try. Not to return to what had been, but to attempt something different. Something honest. I told him I would come to dinner on a Sunday in January. I told him I would come as a guest with no apron and no assignment, and that someone else could figure out the food. He said that was more than fair. He said he had already ordered from a restaurant and had a confirmation number. A small thing, but a start. I told him the conditions I had written in the email were not negotiable. He said he understood and agreed. I told him that agreement in a phone call was different from actual changed behavior over time, and that I would be paying attention to the difference. He said that was fair and that he would try to deserve the chance. I asked about my mother. He said she was struggling. Said she was not yet ready to move from feeling humiliated to taking accountability. I told him that was her work to do, and that I hoped she found a way through it, but that I could not wait for her readiness to set my own timeline. He said he understood. We talked for 22 minutes. About Pinnacle Event Group and what the landmark collective contract meant for the next year. About the Florida market and the team we were building. About what it meant to run a company through a period of significant growth. He asked questions. Real questions with genuine curiosity behind them. He listened to the answers. It was not everything. It was not repaired. But it was the first conversation I could remember having with my father in which I felt like a full person in the room. After we hung up, the fireworks reached their peak. Phoenix lit up in gold and white above the desert. I stood at my window and thought about the 15 years behind me and the 15 years ahead of me and what I wanted those future years to look like. I wanted them to look like the work I had done at Pinnacle. Careful and intentional and true to what I actually believed. I wanted them to include relationships that were honest and mutual and grounded in reality rather than in roles assigned by someone else's expectations. I wanted to keep building something that represented what was actually possible when you took the work seriously enough and showed up completely. I wanted never again to stand in a kitchen on Christmas Eve in an apron cooking for 27 people who did not see me. The fireworks faded. The city hummed. I opened a new document on my laptop and began writing. Not a contract and not an email. A set of personal principles. The kind of document I would never have thought to write 5 years ago, because 5 years ago I had not yet fully believed I was allowed to have them. I wrote that my time was mine. That my professional life was not a hobby or a side project or something smaller than the real things. That I would invest my energy in relationships that offered genuine reciprocity. That I would not apologize for choosing my own growth over other people's comfort. That I would stay in rooms where I was treated as I treated others and leave rooms where I was not. That I would ask to be known accurately and extend that same honesty outward. That I would let success speak in the moments when nothing else could. And I wrote one final thing. That it was never too late. That the day you decide you deserve to be seen clearly is the day everything has the possibility of changing. I believed that. I had earned the right to believe it. The professional momentum in the weeks that followed was extraordinary. Serena's LinkedIn post had been shared thousands of times by the morning of December 26th, and by the end of that week my inbox had received 7 formal partnership inquiries from companies I had been trying to connect with for years. An interview request arrived from a national business publication. A speaker invitation came from an events industry conference I had attended as a guest 3 years earlier. Harold Thompson sent a formal business inquiry to my office email on December 27th. He wanted Pinnacle Event Group to manage the launch celebration for a commercial development project his firm was pursuing, and he wrote that based on everything he had seen and read, he believed I was the right partner for it. I responded with a full proposal within 48 hours. It was a good contract, and we moved forward with it. My father, who had spent 15 years being the gatekeeper to business connections I never needed, turned out to be entirely beside the point. Brianna called me on January 2nd. The call lasted 9 minutes. It was awkward and careful and honest in a way I had not expected from her. She said she had read the Elevation magazine profile 3 times, and that she had not known what to do with it emotionally and was still working that out. She said she had spent a lot of time since Christmas thinking about the way she had spoken to me over the years, and she was not comfortable with what she had found when she actually looked at it directly. She did not apologize with any great eloquence. The apology was clumsy and somewhat incomplete, and she acknowledged those things about it herself. But it was real. Not performed. Not calculated. Just someone looking at something she had done and saying that she wished she had done it differently. I told her I appreciated it, and that I was not in a rush, and that if she wanted to build an actual relationship between us, it would require actual effort from both sides over time. She said she understood. We agreed to have lunch sometime in January. It was a start. My mother took the longest. She did not call in December. She did not write a letter. She sent a brief and correct text on January 4th that said she had been doing some reflection and that she would like to talk when I was ready. I read it and set my phone down and gave myself 2 weeks before responding. When I finally called her, the conversation was short and hard and honest in the specific way that conversations are honest when one person is not yet fully ready to say what needs to be said, but is trying anyway. She acknowledged that she had treated my contributions to the family as something less than they were. She acknowledged that she had not taken my career seriously and that she had dismissed things without understanding them. She did not yet have the full language for what she was admitting, but she was attempting it, and I gave her credit for the attempt. I told her what I needed. The same things I had written in the email. She said she would try. I told her trying was how we would find out whether things had actually changed. We did not arrive at warmth or ease in that first call, but we arrived at honesty, and that felt like the more important foundation. In January, I hired 3 additional team members in preparation for the workload the Landmark collective contract would bring. I began the conversations necessary to expand our vendor network in Florida. I spoke at the industry conference and afterward had 7 conversations with peers and potential partners that I would never have had a year earlier. I started writing the memoir that the literary agent had suggested. Not for anyone else's sake. Not to prove anything to my family or to the industry or to anyone who had ever dismissed me. I was writing it because the story had something in it worth understanding, and because I was finally in a place where I could look at it clearly without being destroyed by what I saw. Pinnacle Event Group finished the first quarter of 2025 with revenue tracking at 42% above the same period the previous year. The Landmark collective relationship was everything Serena had promised it would be. 3 of the partnership inquiries from December had converted into active contracts. The Elevation magazine profile had been cited in 4 industry articles. And every Sunday in January and February and March, I went to my parents' house for dinner as a guest. Someone else handled the food. My father asked about my work and listened to the answers. My mother was quieter than she used to be and was clearly still working through something, but she asked one genuine question about Pinnacle at every visit. Brianna and I had lunch twice, and it was imperfect and real and genuinely better than anything we had managed in the previous 15 years. None of it was resolved. None of it was healed in the clean, decisive way that stories sometimes suggest these things can be. My family was learning to see me accurately, and I was learning to be present without abandoning myself in the process, and that was work that would take as long as it took. What I could say clearly and without any qualification at all was this: The moment I walked away from an empty kitchen on December 23rd and got on a plane to Tampa, Florida, and chose my career and my self-respect over my family's expectation that I would disappear into service one more time was the moment everything became possible. Not because anything dramatic changed overnight, but because I had finally demonstrated to myself in the most unambiguous terms available that I understood my own worth. You cannot negotiate from a position of strength while simultaneously living as though you have no value. You cannot ask to be seen accurately while behaving as though you deserve to be invisible. The moment I stopped shrinking to fit their expectations was the moment I stopped being the smaller version of myself that 15 years of dismissal had been trying to create. I did not need their acknowledgement to know what I had built. But I will tell you honestly that it mattered when they finally gave it. Not because it changed anything about the work or the value of the work, but because being known by the people who should know you best is one of the things that makes a life feel whole. I am Clara Whitfield, and I am the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Event Group. I run a company with 29 employees and contracts with some of the most significant hospitality organizations in the country. I was featured in Elevation magazine. I signed a $2.3 million contract on Christmas Eve while my family was standing in an empty kitchen trying to figure out how to feed 27 people without me. I did not do any of that to prove something to them. I did it because it was the work I was built to do, and I refused to let anyone else's limited imagination define the ceiling on what I was allowed to become. If you have spent any portion of your life being the person in the background, the one who does the work while others take the credit, the one whose career is a hobby and whose contributions are invisible, then I want you to hear this clearly and directly. Your success does not require their permission. It does not require their acknowledgement or their praise or their ability to finally comprehend what you have been doing all along. It only requires you to understand your own value completely and to make decisions from that understanding every single time. The best thing I ever did was leave an empty kitchen on Christmas Eve and get on a plane. The second best thing was to stop apologizing for having done it. Thank you for spending this time with Whispers of Wisdom. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe and let us know in the comments whether you have ever had to choose your own path over someone else's expectations for you. We read every comment, and we are grateful for every one of you who shows up here to listen. Until next time.